What's up everyone, Hardcore Hector here. I just wanted to quickly explain what frame rate and refresh rate is, because it's used a lot in video tech and gaming. I know people just entering the tech scene might not fully understand what it is, and I know when I first entered the tech scene, I made a few missteps, and I want to warn you all about them so you don't make the same mistakes. So let me just quickly explain what refresh rate is. It's often considered in FPS, frames per second. So if you have 60 FPS, that means there are 60 frames being shown on a screen within 1 second, and that's how the animation is made. The more frames per second, the clearer it is. Video games are commonly shown at 30 and 60 frames per second on consoles, but the newer consoles, the Xbox One Series X or whatever it's called, and the PlayStation 5 can finally go above 60 frames per second. Computers can have been able to go above 60 frames per second for years. You can do 120, 144, 240 frames per second, but that's just the refresh rate, the frames per second being pushed to the TV or monitor. You also need a monitor or TV with hardware high enough to show those frames per second to actually see the higher refresh rate. So TVs and monitors also have refresh rates listed in hertz, Hz. The most common refresh rate is 60 hertz. And so a 60 hertz TV can show up to 60 frames per second. However, in the past decade or so, there have been TVs listed at 120 hertz or 240 hertz, but then it has some other marketing terminology like clear LCD or true motion or whatever. And that's just some processing power or whatever to make the video look smoother. But in reality, the higher refresh rate doesn't look that way. It just kind of smears it, and it does this horrible input lag. So the video will end up lagging past the audio if you have surround sound, or if you're gaming and you press a button, it'll take longer for the figure on the screen to show your little input. So those things aren't really the higher refresh rates. When it comes to a TV, TVs are pretty much always 60 frames per second or 60 hertz. I ended up buying a computer monitor with the 144 hertz refresh rate, which means I'm able to play games at up to 144 frames per second. But if I'm playing a video game that only goes up to 60 frames per second, or maybe I'm playing a video game on PC that has really great graphics, so the frame rate just isn't that great, maybe it only goes up to 45 frames per second, my monitor will only show that 45 frames per second, or maybe that 60 frames per second, because that's the maximum that the frame rate will put out from the console. Like say I'm playing Call of Duty, which is always at 60 frames per second. That's why everybody said it looked so clear and smooth, because it was always at 60 frames per second. If I'm playing that game on my 144 hertz monitor, it will only show 60 hertz, 60 frames per second. Just like if I were playing a computer game that's showing, I don't know, 240 frames per second, it's outputting at 240 frames per second, but I'm playing it on a TV that's 60 hertz, it'll only show 60 frames per second. So you need hardware like a TV or monitor with that higher refresh rate, and you need hardware like a video game console or a graphics card in your PC to push out that higher frame rate. So yeah, it'll end up costing a little bit more to see that higher end graphical display or whatever. Some people say it's worth it, and that's usually what they spend all their extra cash on. So I hope this video was useful. If you liked it or appreciated it, you can give it a thumbs up. And subscribe to my channel for more video game content. Sometimes I just do video game gameplay, live streams. Sometimes I do strategy guides. And I want to try and do more videos like this, explaining more tech industry stuff as fast and quickly as possible, and as clearly as possible. No pun intended with the whole refresh rate.